and welcome to PE Connections. We have a very special guest with us today, and I'd like my co-host for today to introduce him. My co-host is James Davis, who is the founder of Cutting Edge International and also the co-founder of Billion Soul Network. James?
It's an honor, Ken, to be with you again here in Springfield and be a part of PE Connection and be a part of what God is doing all over the world.
Thank you. Tell us who our special guest is.
Well, we're
today.
honored to have Dr. James Hudson Taylor IV. He's just getting ready to finish his doctoral work at Asbury, and he and I got connected about 2 years ago. I heard he was going to be in Houston, so I got on a plane and flew down and had breakfast, and then turned around and flew all the way back. And it's been a wonderful relationship. Over 150 years ago, his great-great-grandfather heard the call of God from England and went to mainland China to share the gospel. And we're going to allow Dr. Taylor to share a lot of that, but we're just honored to be here with you, James.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you very much.
Good to have you, and it's exciting to me because, of course, the name of Hudson Taylor is one of the first names you think of when you think of missions. But we may need to reintroduce him to a new generation. Would you give us a little bit of the basics of just who your great-great-grandfather was for those who may not know as much as some people do about him?
Okay. Well, he was born and raised in England, and at the age of 21, in 1853, he left England and left his family, his parents, his other siblings, and traveled to China. And back then, it took a little more time than it does today because it was about a 6-month journey by boat around the southern part of Africa and then to Shanghai. So he arrived on March 1st in 1854 and began his missionary career in China, which actually spanned probably close to 53 or so years of his life. He went to China not a part of what was eventually formed, the China Inland Mission. He was serving with another mission organization at that point. But it was later in 1865 that he felt God's call in his life to mobilize Christian workers, missionaries, to go to the inland parts of China, which at that point many other mission organizations were not prepared to do, just because of the political climate of the day. But Hudson Taylor felt very strongly that God was calling upon him and as well as the church to raise up a new generation of missionaries who would be willing to go to the inland parts of China. And so on June 25th, 1865, he dedicated his life to the Lord to begin a new mission organization called the China Inland Mission. The next day he went to the bank with 10 English pounds.
Wow.
And registered a bank account under the name China Inland Mission.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of the China Inland Mission, which eventually, probably in the 1920s, 1930s, had about 1,300 missionaries scattered right across China. So that's a little bit of who Hudson Taylor was.
Yeah, and there's a lot of remarkable things here. One of the remarkable things is that you're a direct descendant of Hudson Taylor, and you're still ministering in China. And I was surprised. It even goes back further because we talked about his parents actually prayed for him to go to China. Is that right?
That is correct.
Right.
His father actually was very mission-minded. He was a Methodist lay preacher.
Right.
In England, very mission-minded, and really even, I think, at one point wanted to go to China, but for a variety of reasons was not able. And together with his wife, just really felt God laying on their heart to dedicate their firstborn to be a missionary to China.
Wow.
And so when Hudson Taylor was born, it was really his parents' desire and their prayer that their son, their eldest, would be dedicated to the Lord and would go to China as a missionary. And it was interesting because they never told Hudson Taylor this, at least not initially. And it was really only after he had gone to China to serve. And I'm not really we're not really quite sure when exactly they broke the news to him.
Yeah.
But it was really only after he had gone to China that at some point in time they made it known to him that they had actually dedicated him as an unborn, even before he was born, to be a missionary to China.
Yeah, so it's so fascinating because we see the birth of this whole ministry that's continuing today, not just with him, but with the prayers of his parents, and it's just it's amazing to see that.
Yeah, and I think very much like Hannah of the Old Testament, in 1 Samuel, where the first chapter there really gives us a picture of Hannah, a mother of prayer, a woman of prayer, and then obviously later on throughout the book of Samuel, you can trace within Samuel's life this focus upon prayer. And I think that influence of his parents and prayer also greatly impacted Hudson Taylor. And with the formation of the CIM, the China Inland Mission, it's very strong focus upon prayer for the workers, prayer for finances, prayer for the ministry, prayer for China. I think that whole spiritual heritage was something that very much came through Hudson Taylor's upbringing.
Yeah, and Hudson Taylor was very much of a groundbreaker, kind of seen as a nonconformist. The whole creation of a faith ministry, and also taking on the cultural Chinese dress and customs. Could you talk about that some?
Well, it wasn't an easy thing,
Yeah.
and certainly probably he was influenced by others as well. In terms of the Chinese dress, certainly he was influenced by an earlier missionary to China by the name of Charles Gustav, who put on Chinese clothes and found that actually that enabled him to get closer to the people. It enabled him to go to places where technically Westerners or non-Chinese were not able to go. And but at any rate, when Hudson Taylor first went to China, he realized very quickly that at least the Western garment, clothes that he was wearing was an inhibiting factor to share the gospel with the Chinese. And so he took off his his Western clothes, put on his Chinese. And he grew a queue, and we actually have part of his hair because when he went back to England in 1860, he cut off his queue, and he braided his hair into 2 watch bands for his parents, and that has passed down through the generations. So at my home in a drawer lies some parts of Hudson Taylor's hair.
Wow.
But I think looking back, obviously from a missiological point of view, it was evident that he saw something of the necessity of missionaries adapting to native or national customs as a means of not meaning there was one more Christian and one less Chinese, but to see how we can present the gospel of Jesus Christ within the context of the Chinese language, within the context of Chinese culture. He wasn't looked upon very favorably at that point in time by the wider missionary community. They gave him the nickname, or the CIM was called the Pigtail Mission. Because all of the CIM missionaries had to grow pigtails. And so they were, initially I think there was a lot of antagonism toward it, but I think as time went on, he proved that this was really the way to at least, and it wasn't really just an outward kind of a recognition, but it also obviously needed to transfer in terms of one's attitude toward the Chinese, the respect and the sense of, hey, we're equal partners in the furtherance of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So it wasn't really just only an outward kind of action, but it translated inwardly.
When he went to China, he went as a single man.
That is correct.
And he was quite young when he went. And back in those days, there was no such thing as short-term missions, because 6 months there, 6 months back, that's a year if you just stay one day. But then he finally returned, and he gathered more to go with him, as I recall the story. So tell us a little bit about what it was like when he came back the first time, and then there was a time when he's going to get married. So tell us that.
Well, he met his wife Maria in China.
Right.
She was a missionary's kid.
Yes.
Her parents were part of the London Missionary Society.
That's correct. Yes.
And Samuel Dyer and Maria Dyer, at that point in time, they weren't able to go to serve in China because China was not open.
Right.
This was in the early 1800s. And so the LMS, the London Missionary Society, sent Samuel and Maria Dyer to Malaysia to work among overseas Chinese in Penang and in Malacca, and then all the way down to Singapore. And so that was really where they worked. But Maria was born and raised in Penang.
Right.
And then at a very young age, she was about 18 or 19, she went to Ningbo, which is just south of Shanghai, where eventually Hudson Taylor ended up, and where they eventually met. Actually, Hudson Taylor, going to China, paid a horrific emotional cost because when he left England, he was actually, and we would say dating, but back then, I mean, they would say courting. But the father of this person said, if you go to China, I will not let you marry my daughter. If you stay in England, and there are many opportunities for you to serve in England, you stay here and you can marry my daughter. But Hudson Taylor felt very strongly that God was calling him to China, and by making that decision, he in essence broke off that relationship. So he went to China a lonely bachelor.
That's right.
And it was a difficult time. But the Lord was sovereign, and God's hands was in that. And of course, he eventually met Maria. And they were married in China, and began serving. And then obviously going back to England, he was subsequently able to mobilize a group of 24 to go back to China, and thus the beginning of the China Inland Mission.
And when he started the China Inland Mission, everybody over at the LDS wasn't very excited about that. LMS, the London Missionary Society, very excited about him starting a new organization.
Well, I'm not. They were probably. He never really intended on starting another organization, and he really tried to find existing mission organizations
to partner with,
who would be willing to send him and as well as others to the inland of China. But he never found any organization that was willing to do that. And he was left, in essence, to wrestle with God alone. And God placed that burden upon his heart to raise up a group of people to go to where others are not going, where others are not willing or unable to go, and yet God was opening up doors. And so and even when he set up the CIM, he was very conscious of the fact that he did not want the China Inland Mission to be seen as competing against existing mission organizations. And so, for instance, early on, he then decided that they would not solicit money. There would be no offerings taken up for the China Inland Mission because he didn't want any monies intended originally to these existing mission organizations to be diverted to the CIM. he decided that the CIM would not accept clergy because clergy were going to existing mission organizations. And so he did not want to be seen as taking away people who would go with existing mission organizations. And so he focused very much on mobilizing lay Christians, brothers and sisters, who yet had a vision and a burden for evangelism and a vision and a burden for missions to go with him to China. And so, it was a group of unordained people who went with Hudson Taylor, who himself wasn't even ordained. And so he was very careful. He didn't want to be seen as setting up some kind of a competing organization with existing ministries. And so I think that sense of being sensitive to others and being very conscious of the importance of unity within the wider body of Christ, I think is something that really needs to be heard today as well in a world where, while God is calling different organizations to be involved in different aspects of the Great Commission, yet in a sense we need to still find that sense of unity in the midst of diversity. And we serve one Lord, and we're called to fulfill that one Great Commission.
And are you seeing that as you continue to minister in China? What do you see happening today?
Well, I think that's obviously something we need to keep working at. I think how to synergize better, not only I think with different churches or different mission agencies that are working in China. I think how we can build better partnerships with the church in China as well, I think is a critical challenge for us as we serve in China today, because the needs of China are tremendous, and so there are a lot of opportunities. And how can we partner together with existing organizations? And yet at the same time, we obviously see the church in China maturing. The gospel first came through the efforts of Robert Morrison in 1807. And so just a little over 3 years ago, we celebrated the 200th anniversary of the gospel coming to China. Wow. And I think we see the church in China maturing. And I think we from the outside need to think through how we can partner together with them, not in a paternalistic kind of, way, a mentality, step aside, we're the experts, we have the knowledge, we have the experience. But how can we humbly come beside our brothers and sisters in China and find that unity in ministry together? To see not only China evangelized, but obviously I think the Great Commission is also given to the Chinese church. And how could the Chinese church be even more a strategic part, a critical part of the fulfillment of the Great Commission?
And I'd like to piggyback on that, because one time you and I ran a conversation last year, and he really helped frame my thinking about the church, not just in China, but the Chinese church worldwide. And you made some comments about the Chinese church being so distributed around the world, the United States, Latin America. Talk a little bit about that, because sometimes, as in the West, we think in geographical terms only, and in your understanding, it's even broader than that when you think about the Chinese church. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the Chinese church is probably very, very unique if you look at the global church today. I am not aware of another ethnic church that is so scattered right across the world. I mean, somebody has jokingly said, wherever you find a Chinese restaurant, you'll find a Chinese church. And we'll find Chinese restaurants in all kinds of places.
That's right.
And I think that's a very unique thing that the Chinese church has.
That's right, I agree.
And I think one of the burdens on my heart as I have served in the Chinese church is how can we work together with the Chinese church on seeing that challenge for evangelism and missions for the Chinese church globally,
Right.
not only to be focused upon reaching fellow Chinese, but then also seeing, hey, God has given the Chinese church a strategic position of being in a multitude of cultures and countries. And how can we as a Chinese church not only become recipients of God's grace, but bestowers of God's grace,
Right.
and reach cross-culturally within the context of where God has placed them. But the church, the Chinese church worldwide, I think, as you mentioned,
Yes.
James, is very diverse. I mean,
It
you
is.
have the overseas Chinese church.
That's right.
And even that is very diverse because the Chinese church in North America,
Right.
specifically the Chinese church in America,
That's right.
or the United States, is very the resources here, the personnel here. I mean, it's a richly blessed community of believers. But if you were to go to Central America, if you were to go to South America, Europe, and even Africa,
Right.
you would find the Chinese church there very different
Very
than
different,
the
yes.
church here in America.
That's right.
Even within Asia, the church in Taiwan, the church in Singapore, the church in Hong Kong. Of course, China, we tend to think of it in terms of the official, what we call the three self church, the self-supporting, self-propagating, and self-governing. That's the government-approved churches. And then obviously we have what we call the house churches. And we tend to think of it in terms of those two big pieces, where in fact actually it's not just those two
That's
big
right.
pieces. Within the house church, you have the rural house church, you have the urban house church.
Right. Right. Right.
And those are very, very different as well. And if we're going to minister in those, the way we minister in rural house churches will be very different than the way we minister in urban house churches.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a degree of complexity there.
Right.
I don't want to overwhelm our viewers, but I think it's important for us just to realize that it is a complex situation. We need to learn as much as we can
Right.
if we're going to serve effectively within the wider Chinese Christian community.
Amen. Well, we're almost out of time, but there's one more question I want to ask, and that is the thought to me that all these generations after Hudson Taylor, we find his descendants still with a passion for China. Could you talk a bit about legacy, your legacy, and how that vision has continued to be passed down in your family without being diluted?
Well, I'm not sure it hasn't been diluted. I don't really think our family has any kind of secret formula that I could share with people. You know, I think to sit here today, I'm very conscious of the fact that it's by God's grace and His grace alone. Obviously, I think being brought up in that family, the stories growing up that I heard of Hudson Taylor, the stories of his children,
right.
my great-grandfather, certainly the stories of my grandparents as they served in China during the Sino-Japanese War. And even, I think, what I saw from my parents. I think all of that has greatly impacted my life, both indirectly as well as directly. My Chinese name, my English name represents my parents' desire for their children or for their son. And I am certain that was accompanied by years of faithful praying for their children and for their son, that God would enable him, that is me, to be faithful in my generation to whatever God called me to be. I don't ever remember my parents saying very specifically to me, I want you to be a missionary. I don't ever recall them telling me that. But I think it was just God's grace and God's work in and through circumstances, in and through the lives of people that He brought into my life, as well as that spiritual heritage that after I graduated from college, I very clearly saw God, sensed God's calling in my life. Not because I was the fourth, but in my generation, God was also calling me. It was interesting. I've often been challenged by the fact that the book of Joshua begins with a family being saved. That is Rahab's family. But it doesn't end there, because the 24th chapter of Joshua closes with a family committing to serve the Lord. And I believe that God's call for all of us, individuals as well as families, we are saved to serve. And Rahab was a picture of a family who was saved. And yet Joshua, the book of Joshua, closes with the picture of a family that is committed to serve the Lord in his generation, where Joshua says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." So I think that's a wonderful picture that's very much challenged me and my family.
Amen. James, it's been great having you. Thank you for
thank
taking
you.
the time to,
Thank you very
to
much.
be with us here today. And James Davis, thank you as well. Thank you for viewing today. Our guest once again has been James Hudson Taylor IV. Thanks for being with us at TV Connection.